Hello and welcome to the launch of UBI Lab Bristol. I'm Artemis Debear, co-founder of UBI Lab Bristol. About July time, I think it was, Johnny, I found out about the UBI Lab Network and got very excited about it and couldn't believe that there wasn't one in Bristol already. So I emailed the network saying, hey, should we do a Bristol thing? And Johnny got back to me immediately. I think it was in sort of minutes, saying, yes, brilliant. When can we talk? So we had a very exciting phone call or Zoom call. And I think it was even that day, wasn't it, Johnny, that Massive Attack had released their video about UBI. So there was quite a lot of Bristol-based UBI excitement going on anyway. So it was quite serendipitous, really. And then and here we are at the launch. So we're here today to launch our campaign and our petition to Bristol City Council to pass a motion supporting a basic income trial in the city. And you can find a link to the petition in the chat. I'm joined by Green Party Councillor Cleo Lake, who has a background in social justice activism and spent a year as Bristol's Lord Mayor. Labour Councillor for Liverpool, Patrick Hurley, who is also the CEO of Inclusive Economy Liverpool and co-founder of UBI Lab Liverpool. Editor-at-large of the Canary, Kerry-Anne Mendoza, who is known for creating one of the UK's top independent political blogs, Scriptonite Daily, and for authoring the bestseller Austerity. And last but not least, UBI Lab Network co-founder Sam Gregory, who is a Sheffield-based journalist and political campaigner. Give everyone a wave. So first of all, I'd really like to invite Sam to give us a brief introduction to the concept of universal basic income and the work of the UBI Lab Network.
Thanks, Artemis. That's great. I'm hoping to see if I can share my screen. I've got a bit of a PowerPoint thing. How do I do that? Okay. Should have started. Can you see that?
Yep.
Brilliant. So, hi, I'm Sam from the UBI Lab Network. So the UBI Lab Network is a network of independent autonomous groups across the UK and around the world exploring the potential of universal basic income. We were born in 2016 out of a series of events on UBI at a politics festival in Sheffield called the Festival of Debate. And we're hosted by Opus Independence, which is a social enterprise based in Sheffield that me and Johnny and quite a few other UBI Lab people from Sheffield all work for. So the company does a number of projects, including the festival, and we run a citizen media platform called Now Then, and of course UBI Lab, which has sort of grown from being 6 of us in a room above a pub to being this absolute sprawling monster of an organisation. Many of you will already be familiar with the concept, but what is a universal basic income? The idea is that we replace substantial parts of the current welfare system with a monthly payment to everyone, regardless of their wealth, income or employment status. So a recent modelling exercise by an economist for Open Democracy found that a UBI of £7,706 per adult and £3,853 per child per year in the UK would have a massive gross cost of 438 billion. But once you factor in the money you save from tax increases and by scrapping much of the bureaucracy of the current benefit system, they found that the net cost would only be 67 billion, which the UK can easily afford. And that's before you factor in all the benefits which are much more difficult to calculate. Like, for example, if everyone received a UBI, what would happen to the mental health budget? And it's almost impossible to calculate that, but I imagine it would be slashed by a number of, by a number of magnitudes in terms of the amount of poor mental health that is caused by financial insecurity, and the way a UBI would change that. So the most substantial UBI pilot that's taken place so far has taken place in Finland, where 2,000 people receiving unemployment benefit from all over the country were given €560 per month for 2 years. as you can see from these results, their physical and mental health improved compared to the control group, and they had an increased sense of financial well-being, as you'd expect. They also reported greater trust in institutions, and interestingly, the recipients of the UBI actually worked slightly more on average than the control group, which dispels this myth going around that UBI is a disincentive to work. And people generally think that the reason why they work slightly more is because there weren't these incredibly high marginal tax rates of coming out of the benefit system. So if you're coming off universal credit and into a little bit of work, say you're doing a day a week, then effectively the money that gets clawed back out of your universal credit means there's really not that much advantage of going off, coming out of the benefit system into a small amount of work, whereas a UBI would kind of get rid of that sort of perverse incentive, and it would allow everyone to kind of do the amount of work they want to do. So in our network, we've now got 35, I think it's 35, Johnny will correct me if it's changed since I wrote this last week, 35 UBI Lab groups, which stretch around the world, but are predominantly focused in the north of England at the moment. All started by people in their communities where they are. So as well as the geographic labs, we've got 5 identity-based labs that explore what a universal basic income could do for disabled people, LGBTQ plus people, young people, women and artists. So these have all been started by people coming to us saying, I'd like to explore UBI from this angle. So I'm one of, as well as being one of the original people of the Sheffield group, I'm also a co-founder of the LGBTQ plus lab. When someone came along and said, I really want to explore, you know, how would a UBI benefit trans people? You know, what are the specific opportunities and also challenges that people from different communities that need thinking about when kind of implementing something like a UBI. So the structure allows us to share resources and knowledge across the network and provide support to all of our groups from our small staff team based in Sheffield. And if you're interested in starting a lab where you are, unless obviously you're in Bristol, in which case you already have, then get in touch with us. One of the main projects of the network over the past year has been to get local authorities to pass council motions calling for UBI pilots in their area. And this was actually instigated by Patrick, who's on the call, who before the whole network existed, had the idea of getting Liverpool City Council to pass a council motion calling for a UBI pilot in Liverpool and expressing Liverpool's interest in hosting any future pilot. And that sparked off the eternal rivalry, because now Sheffield will always have been second to Liverpool. But what can we do about that? So Sheffield was second about 6 months after Patrick's motion. So we managed to get, so we wrote to all of our councillors. We sent them letters asking them, you know, explaining UBI and saying why Sheffield should hold a pilot. We said stuff like, you know, Sheffield has a history of radical politics and kind of experimenting with new ideas. And so they passed the second motion and we managed to get press coverage for it in The Guardian and a couple of other places. And that's one of the key things with these council motions, because obviously Boris Johnson's government aren't going to launch a UBI pilot tomorrow. So what's really important is getting press coverage for each of these motions so they generate kind of media interest in UBI. So we've now got 11, I think 11 passed. That might actually, since I wrote this a week ago, I think that's now 12 because we got one in Swansea the other day. We've got 11 of these motions passed, including 3 in Northern Ireland and 1 in the Welsh Senate. So the entire Welsh Senate passed a motion saying that they would like to hold a UBI pilot in Wales. As I said, the idea is to sort of generate press coverage for UBI of each motion passed, which we've done, but also to create political legitimacy for the idea by having some of the UK's biggest cities say that the current welfare system isn't working. In that way, we're working to hopefully shift this. So if we get all these big cities like, you know, Liverpool and Belfast and Sheffield and Bristol to say they want to try this idea, it becomes less of a sort of fringe idea and hopefully becomes more an idea that eventually the Labour Party feel like they can adopt as party policy, which is an ongoing struggle that we're working on. Again, if you're not from Bristol, if you're from Bristol and you'd like to help pass one of these motions in your area, then get in touch with us. So yeah, Leeds as well, which we've got in the Independent, and Hull in January this year, which feels like about 20 years ago. One of the other most exciting projects we've got at the moment is we've created the first ever CPPLG in partnership with the Basic Income Conversation, which is an organisation run by the think tank Compass. So CPPLG stands for Cross-Party Parliamentary and Local Government Group, and it's a new hybrid form of APPG, all-party parliamentary group, that brings MPs and peers together with councillors and mayors and members of the devolved assemblies on an equal footing to explore and campaign for UBI. We were thinking that traditional kind of APPGs are obviously very Westminster centric because it's just MPs and peers talking about an issue. So we wanted to create a new kind of way of doing them, which takes that kind of conversation across the country. So when we've got councillors and we've got MPs sitting on the CPPLG, then everyone's kind of an equal member within the CPPLG. So that's really exciting. It's co-chaired by Labour, Green, SNP and Lib Dem MPs, as well as the Green Party's Baroness Natalie Bennett and Patrick Brown, who's a Alliance Party councillor in Northern Ireland, and Alison Teal, who's a Green Party councillor in Sheffield. Again, if you're an elected representative or local councillor and you'd like to get involved with the CPPLG, then get in touch. This is our first major project as the CPPLG. So we recently wrote a letter to Chancellor Rishi Sunak, work with local authorities and devolved assemblies that expressed a wish to pilot UBI by passing one in the UK would require cooperation from HMRC and the DWP, as the Scottish Government have recently found. It just doesn't work if the government don't cooperate, because basically you give people UBI and they get it either taken out of their benefits they're receiving or pay it extra in tax, and you can't really test what the effect will be. So we need their involvement. So we wrote this letter from 520 elected representatives from pretty much every party except the Conservatives, and pretty much every council across the UK. So yeah, it is. And as you can see, we got it launched in The Guardian. Members of the public can now add their own names. Hopefully Johnny will post a link in the chat. And as of a week ago, we had 3,903 extra signatures from members of the public. I think, is my time up? Sorry, I can't see messages on the screen sharing. I'll very, very, very briefly mention this, if that's all right. So something that we're really excited about at the moment is the idea of micro pilots. So just doing a pilot with a really small number of people, because obviously it's much cheaper to do, and you can potentially do it without needing buy-in from HMRC and the DWP. So this was a micro pilot that took place in Mississippi, where the organisation called the Magnolia Mothers Trust provided $1,000 a month with no strings attached for 1 year to 20 low-income black mothers living in federally subsidised housing. And it brought out loads of amazing stories, as you'd expect, you know, people talking about how it transformed their lives. So could we do something similar in the UK? So we're currently kind of working out how that might be possible in the UK and who might be up for doing that. So yeah, there's our website and our email address, and please do follow us on Twitter and also follow UBI Lab Bristol. And yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you, Sam. I'm gonna have to keep taking my glasses on and off because there's massive glare with them. So I'm gonna take them off when I'm speaking so you can actually see my eyes rather than just glare. That was really helpful. So I really like to ask all of the panelists why they think a basic income would be great for Bristol. And could I ask Cleo to go first, please?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Good to be here at this launch. I think it is really important that we have the lab here in Bristol so that we can have more support lobbying for this. And I really do believe it's the way forward. And as we've heard from the extensive introduction there by Sam, it's gone from quite a fringe idea to being way more mainstream now, with even magazines like Vice picking it up, for example. I'm also an artist myself, a creative background, and I work for an organisation, Black Artists on the Move. And through the first lockdown, we had a number of sessions with artists from across the UK trying to support them. And it was quite clear there that there are so many gaps, and we'll know that through our experience here. And there's been a lot of lobbying from the Musicians Union and other artists to say that this is something that is needed for the creative and artistic sector, which I totally support. And we are a creative city here in Bristol, as you'll all be aware. So I think part of this is also, it came to light that a lot of artists, particularly from the Black community, were sort of also, within the gig economy and also going job to job, quite precariously, and didn't even know they were entitled, or perhaps were overwhelmed by the idea of applying for things that they were entitled to. So I really think that let's just keep it simple. What do we want out of life? Well, we want to live. So let's make that as simple as we can for people and support people to, live a life that isn't as stressed, has some security, has a bit of backup. I like what a comment that I think it was Nina who put in the chat, that there may be an initial outlay, but it's about, if you're a parent, being able to have that extra time to be with your family and have choices. And I think that's what we need to go for. We need to envision a world which is radically different than the world we have now. And I would also say that the sense of privilege that we all have really in the UK, and I'm very aware of my privilege, comes to light is if we can get this off the ground, and if we can champion this as a country, as a nation, then hopefully it'll have a knock-on effect in other countries and nations, particularly if we also think about, envisioning a society and a world which is more borderless as we move forward. Because I have also been completely aware with colleagues and artists in places like Ghana, where there's no safety net at all. And they kind of pick up on the idea of a universal basic income. Wow. So yeah, I think let's really be ambitious with our mentality, with our thinking, with our drive. And I think my colleague as well, a fellow Green councillor, has also put in the chat a link to the motion that will be going to Bristol City Council. It probably won't be heard tomorrow, but if you want to see what Green councillors have been up to, you can check that out as well.
Great, thank you, Cleo. And Kerry-Anne, why do you think that universal basic income would be great for Bristol?
Why don't I? That's the question. There are so many reasons. I think for me, there are kind of, I like to look at it as a kind of moral case and a sort of rational economic case. The moral case is to view it not as free money or as a handout or as some form of charity, but as a public inheritance, because there are lots of people in this country and around the world. There is still a very minority, but they end up in all the top jobs, who have been gifted a private inheritance. And that enables them to become judges and solicitors and actors and all of these things that take time and a lot of training and often internships and unpaid experience in order to achieve. And working class people, those that don't have the luxury of a private inheritance, are really frozen out of that whole process. And that's how come you end up with working class people, and the working class disproportionately is representing people of color and disabled people and others, who are then underrepresented in all of these areas of life which we would dearly love to be a part of. So it's the public inheritance, and that stems from the idea that nobody who's wealthy today did that on their own. We've got to destroy the myth of the self-made man and woman. It's a nonsense. They lived past 3 because of the healthcare. They got from A to B because of the transport. They learned what they did because of the education system. These are all contributions that started long before their lives did. So it's that concept of a public inheritance that gives us all that. It's, in one hand, it's something that we're entitled to, but on the other hand, it's also an obligation for all of us to take on. The second reason is more kind of practical, and that's, you know, capitalism is in crisis, absolutely clearly for everyone to see. And I think, you know, the COVID pandemic has really brought a lot of the issues that were already there to the fore. Whether it's, you know, the absolute gutting of wages and workers' terms and conditions and other rights, simultaneously with the gutting of the welfare state more broadly, and with ideological austerity. So we're now in a situation where people are becoming more and more trapped in poverty, and with all of the downsides of that. And while you might have the odd kind of person who has enough money in their pocket tell you that money doesn't make you happy, that might be true, but not having money definitely contributes to depression and other mental health issues. So, you know, it's about the kind of society you want to live in. Do you want to live in a society where we're in this constant state of wealth being hoovered upwards to an ever smaller group of people? Or do you want to have a functioning economy? And that brings me to my next point, which is, what is an economy? Because a lot of the supposedly economic arguments against UBI are not economic arguments at all. They're personal opinions masquerading as economic arguments, because they often stem from a misdirect about what an economy is. And it's been reduced. Decades of socialization and propaganda have taught us that an economy is the performance of a handful of companies at generating profit and how many billionaires you've got in society. That is manifestly untrue. An economy exists to distribute resources, and the more effectively those resources are distributed, that's how well your economy is functioning. So actually, billionaires are a sign that your economy is not working, because that means that wealth is being hoarded. And I wanted to explain this in really layman terms for people with an example we'll all understand. So when the pandemic kicked off, what happened with toilet roll? Right? We couldn't get any of it because people were hoarding it. There was enough toilet paper to go around, but then there wasn't, because some people decided to take more of it than they needed out of panic. That's all that's happened with money. It's the same thing. A billionaire is not a wealth creator. They're a wealth hoarder. They are hoarding wealth and currency that should be being distributed more broadly around the economy, and that creates poverty. And I think once you understand that basic premise, UBI becomes a no-brainer, because you say, okay, anything that we can do to place controls on the abuse of our economy and the abuses of our system that mean that those resources aren't being distributed effectively need to be dealt with. And UBI is one among a raft of measures that I think we'd all probably like to see implemented to improve the functioning of our economy. And where I'd like to finish really is with why Bristol in particular, because, you know, a lot of us can make arguments for UBI more broadly, but why Bristol specifically? Well, I feel really passionately about this because, one, I'm a person of colour, and two, I'm from Bristol, born and raised there, as you could probably tell from my accent. And Bristol is just so emblematic of the point I began with about public inheritance being necessary, because most of the wealth in Bristol is off the backs of enslaved people. That's the reality. It's not a matter of opinion. You can't like it or dislike it. It just is the truth. And so the idea that we can correct that historical mistake in this way is almost like a form of reparations, really, for all of us, so that we take that wealth that has been concentrated and generated through systemic abuse and we redistribute it effectively so that all of us get to benefit in it. Everyone's kids get a decent education and a decent opportunity to become who they want to in life. Second point about Bristol, homelessness has risen 128% in the last 3 years. And anyone who lives in Bristol, you've seen this happen before your eyes. You know, you've gone from maybe seeing the odd homeless person in the centre to it being everywhere, you know, tent cities around roundabouts and all of this sort of stuff, which didn't exist before. And these are all the symptoms of a failing economy. And that's only going to get worse because there aren't currently any policies in place or underway that plan to correct that issue. And really kind of, I guess my final point is that why not Bristol? You know, Bristol does have a history of ingenuity and innovation and creativity. We're a centre for arts and culture and so much more. And the idea that Bristol could be a part of leading a change that would really revolutionise the world in terms of how we manage our economy, how we define work, how we value each other's contributions beyond, you know, the wages that we earn in the job that we happen to have found ourselves in, is just such an amazing and inspiring opportunity that I think really you've got to be thoroughly ideologically committed to suffering and inequality not to want to be a part of that. So I would say to everyone in Bristol, get involved, make this happen, and help Bristol be part of leading an incredible transformation in the world.
Thank you, Kerry-Anne. I just want to pick up on one of the things you said about money not making people happy, but not having money making you unhappy. I read a study a few years ago that showed that money doesn't make you happy after you have a certain amount, after you can make, after you can meet all of your basic needs. After that, no, it doesn't make you any happier. But up until that point, it very much does make you much happier. Yeah, it makes a massive difference. Yeah, hugely. Thank you. So Sam, I know you're from Sheffield, but would you please tell us why you think that UBI would be great for Bristol?
For Bristol, yeah, I think it'd be great for everywhere. Obviously, that's sort of the joy of it. I think one of my kind of big interests in UBI is the idea of I don't like to use the term like post-work because it sounds kind of academic and very nerdy, but all these kind of ideas about how we could kind of, how a UBI could help us transition to like a 4-day week and beyond, because we're obviously doing way too much work in general as a society, given that we're pretty much working the same hours as we were 100 years ago, despite, you know, tenfold improvements in productivity and computers and all these things. So we're obviously, no one really needs to be doing this much work. So the David Graeber's book, which I won't name on the public call, but I think most of you will know the book I mean. He has this idea that so many jobs in our society, somehow modern capitalism has evolved to kind of invent like pointless jobs that we don't need to do just to keep all of us working all the time. So for example, like he names like offices where of like half a dozen people, where there's then a secretary at, you know, sitting at a reception desk at the front of the office who's doing nothing all day, because people, when they come into a company, they expect there to be someone at a reception desk. So all these kind of jobs that people are doing, that if we kind of got rid of them and we had a UBI instead, we could maybe kind of redistribute a lot of those hours, because at the moment we're in an economy where a lot of people feel like they're working too many hours and they'd rather do less, and obviously quite a lot of people don't have any hours and would like more. So there's a huge kind of inequality in terms of the distribution of working hours, and UBI, obviously it kind of gives people the income top up to allow them to reduce the amount of time they're at work and maybe spend more time looking after children or caring for family members. And it also gives people the power to say no to exploitative or low-paying jobs. That's one of the kind of best things about it. Unions, a lot of the unions we've spoken to seem to be really hesitant about UBI because their interest is in kind of work and they think people will give up work. Whereas actually, I think a UBI would strengthen people's relationship with employers. I think more people would join unions once they've got the UBI, and that kind of empowers them. And that kind of gives them the advantage, and they've got more kind of bargaining power. I think people would realise that actually, once they get a taste of that kind of collective power through the UBI, they would actually want more of it, and they would want better working conditions, higher pay, and yeah, that's my kind of main interest in it, really. Yeah, Johnny's put a link to the the David Graeber book in the chat for probably the one person on the call who hasn't already read it.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, for me, automation is an absolutely massive factor with UBI. We're living in a reality where most jobs are not going to exist quite shortly, and we have to find a way of decoupling work from wealth. I mean, it is actually decoupled from work and wealth. They're not that closely related anyway, but it's an idea that they are closely related that we have to break down somehow, and I think UBI is really key to that. I think we have lost Patrick, is that right? Yeah, okay. Unfortunately, Patrick isn't, we've lost Patrick and we don't know where he's gone. We've got a missing Patrick. So in that case, let's move on to questions from anyone. So we've got a question from Paul Harnett, specifically for Kerry-Anne. How do we get UBI into the Labour Party manifesto and supported by unions? And also adds great speech, by the way.
Thank you very much. Oh, that's a difficult question with Labour and the state that it's in at the moment. Free speech is an issue with the Labour Party at the moment, let alone universal basic income. So, but I'm not defeatist about it. I think actually that we need to take the same approach with the Labour Party now, which has obviously been taken over by centrists, is as we would with the government. I think you almost need to consider them sort of very similar ideologically. You're dealing with people that are centre-right, for want of a better word. So it has to be bottom up. It has to be unignorable. I think the involvement of the unions is absolutely critical. And I think that would be where I would start. And I know that work is already underway anyway. And it's about getting the public support, it's getting the union support. And I think ultimately, and I think it actually will come to this, because I don't think UBI is just going to happen because people are nice in Westminster and decide it is. I think it's going to be a battle to get this through. So I think we do actually also have to consider the stick as well as the carrot. And that's where the unions come in, and it's debt strikes, rent strikes, labour strikes. Ultimately, because what we've witnessed over the past 30, 40 years, let alone the past 10, is really the tearing up of the social contract at the wealthy people's end and at the government and state end, while meanwhile most of us are still paying taxes and going to work and doing all of the things that uphold our end of the social contract. So I think it's about lobbying, it's about gathering support, it's about creating that big public wave of pro-UBI sentiment. So it gets you in a position where we say, we really, really want this, give it to us. And then if they say no, then we have to have consequences for that no, because the reality is we all run the country. And the people in Westminster are not our betters, they're our staff. They're people that we pay to represent our interests in Parliament. And if they're not doing that, then we need to seriously be recalling MPs and replacing them with MPs who will actually represent those interests, or react more broadly against the system itself and say, we're not playing if you're not playing. There has to be a quid pro quo here. Otherwise, we're just slaves to the system, and we really don't need to be, because the power really does rest with us.
Thank you, Kerry-Anne. We've got a question for Cleo. Nina Banbury from Bristol asks, how could government legislation play a role in redistribution of wealth to prevent the hoarding of it?
Well, I think raising awareness of UBI and lobbying, as we've heard in the introduction, is a way that we need to push the government into legislation. Nothing's going to happen without us pushing for it. And as Kerry-Anne has mentioned, we do have the power as the people. And it's about now spreading the message and working very closely with unions and working people, because I agree that the phrase, I quite like Sam's phrase of post-work, the concept of post-work. And let's face it, whilst the physical shackles and whips may have gone, many people will say most of us still working on the plantations. And that of course cuts across race, perhaps doesn't cut across class. So it's really imperative that we do get that mass support, that mass movement now to demand difference and to force that legislation. Other things that are happening, Kerry-Anne also mentioned reparations, and in a different context with reparations for the transatlantic enslavement of African people and trafficking in African people. There is a movement now to lobby for this all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry into truth and reparatory justice. So that's one of the vehicles that we hope will come to pass, whereby there can be a conversation to work out how that would be administered. So I think legislation will be necessary, but that can't happen until we get the mass movement behind this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Cleo. One of the questions submitted in advance we had was, why should we give free money to the richest and not target the poorest? Would anyone like to volunteer to answer that one? Kerry-Anne?
Yeah, so universality is important for two key reasons. One is it stops you getting a poverty trap situation, which is what we have currently with means tested benefits. So, you know, effectively that disincentivizes you finding a position where you earn more or creating other means of getting a better income, because effectively then you lose this income that you have. So it almost acts as like a 90% tax rate if you went from, you know, the UBI into the next tier. So you're almost, it becomes self-defeating if you allow the poverty trap to still exist. The second point is that means testing itself is bureaucratic and costly. And it's often, you know, and we're seeing this now with the DWP currently, where you'll spend £2 billion to save 200,000. And it's not economically efficient. It literally only exists because of a really toxic conversation we've created around scarcity. And this idea that we can't possibly give a penny, you know, to someone who doesn't deserve it, which is just crazy. We've got a GDP of 2 trillion, you know, and more. This is completely affordable. So those would be my two key. Oh, the third one, which is also really important, is that the process of means testing itself can mean that the people who most need the benefit or the support don't get it, because they don't have the education or the access to the internet, or just the sheer confidence or even the knowledge that the thing exists to actually go and then claim it. So the point of universal basic income is it is for all of us, because just because someone has a private inheritance or a big job with a big salary attached, they're also still entitled to their public inheritance. You know, that's fine. And I think it's really important to keep that concept in all of us, that regardless, I mean, what even if your parents are rich, but you're LGBTQI and they're prejudiced against you, so you don't get the opportunity. So means test wise, you wouldn't qualify for UBI, but you do actually need it. So, you know, just there's no point in these layers and layers of bureaucracy. Have a simple principle. It's our entitlement and our obligation, and go with that.
Yeah, absolutely. The means testing is just so, it's just so, there's so many problems with it in so many ways.
Yeah.
I remember when I was at university and I had a friend who whose parents were farmers. They were really not wealthy at all, but because they owned a farm, she couldn't really get any help with university costs at all. And so she almost didn't go, even though she really wanted to and really was, you know, well equipped to go, because she just couldn't get, she really couldn't get the help that she needed to go. So I think these means testing cause so many problems that UBI would just solve, and it would be so much cheaper. It just seems like a no-brainer completely. Yeah. Great, thank you. Cleo, you said in the chat, would you want to respond, or I can read out your comment if you'd rather?
No, it's just following up on the question that Nina asked, and I just thought about it as well, and considered that land reform is also part of that when we think of you know, the redistribution of wealth. And I know that Scotland has managed to pass some laws to that effect, and has, you know, enabled communities to come together and actually, in a very simple way of putting it, kick or tell dukes and all the rest of it, and the gentry and the elites, that they need to, you know, the gig is up and they need to share. Basically, that's the bottom line. It's not, how can it be feasible that you know, a small percentage of people can simply hoard that amount of land when we have this homelessness crisis, when we have you know, all these issues that we have going on. So I'm encouraged by what's happening in Scotland, and I do hope that it's something that will come to England as well. But again, it's something that we need to push for.
Yeah, absolutely. How is it okay for some people to have multiple homes and other people not to have any? That just seems absolutely outrageous. Like, how can anyone think that's okay? We have I can't see any more questions actually. One of the other questions that we had submitted in advance was, how do we ensure that people already on benefits don't lose out? Would anyone like to give that one a go? Kerry-Anne.
I will give way if anyone else wants to chip in, by the way. I don't want to dominate this there. Sorry, do you ask me the question again? I've made myself laugh and distracted myself.
No, it's fine. How do we ensure that people on benefits already don't lose out with UBI? Yeah, so how I conceive of UBI, and other people may have a different opinion, so do chip in if you do. But UBI should be the basic step of a robust welfare state and all of your other economic controls. So you might have a right-wing argument for UBI that says, this is great, we can get rid of all these other benefits and just give people this cash. And believe me, they will. They'll get rid of the NHS, they'll get rid of state, you know, funded education, they'll get rid of a lot and say, look, we've given you the cash, now you go take that cash and use it to buy the things that you buy, and then you still end up with the same level of inequality because you've got people living on basic who can't even afford, you know, decent healthcare and education. So to me, UBI is not a panacea. It's not the beginning and end of this project. And I think that there is absolutely a need to think about the sorts of reasons where people would have a higher cost of living. And so that would include disabled people, might include LGBTQI people, it would include people who are finding themselves in situations of abuse, whether that be domestic abuse or familial abuse or other kinds. It could be people living you know, with mental ill health and all sorts of other reasons that mean actually it costs more to live because you might need more transport or more other kinds of support and all of these sorts of things to make life work. So I would be pushing for those things to be advanced. And someone always comes back at that point and says, yeah, but what about affordability? Not to get into MMT and all that other stuff, but you know, if you've got your own currency and a national bank, there is no such thing as an affordability issue. There is only what you choose to create money for. And at the moment, we create free money for people who already have it in quantitative easing. And I'll just give you one figure before I shut up, which is just absolutely spellbinding to me, which is that just in the last few years, just post-financial crisis, the US government has pumped $475 trillion of free money in the form of quantitative easing into just the financial services industry. Now, if they had given that to US citizens, it would be the equivalent around $55,000 to $56,000 per household. So that's well beyond basic income. You know, that's like decent salary levels. You know, what's that, about 40,000 quid, something like that. So when we're talking about affordability, I think we really need to change the terms of that debate as well. And I think that then leads back into the why you could continue to have the rest of your welfare state, because you would choose that it is more affordable to create mass wealth and prosperity than it is to create mass death and mass ill health and mass ill mental health. Yeah, absolutely. Sam,
just very briefly, just want to say in answer to how do we make sure people with extra needs don't lose out, we absolutely have to be very clear in the UBI that we're advocating for, because we're not as UBI Lab, we don't put forward an exact proposal about this is exactly what UBI would look like, you know, this is the exact amount, but we need to be very clear all the time that we would never support a UBI that made vulnerable people or people currently on low incomes worse off. And there's been some really interesting work going on within the network. So in our UBI Lab Disability, they've recently published a paper, which I'm sure our wizard Johnny will put in the chat within seconds, on the idea of UBI plus. A proposal for what a UBI with extra like top-up payments for people with disabilities who have extra needs, what that could look like and how it would work. Because obviously you kind of want to get rid of a lot of you want to get rid of as much means testing as possible, but having any sort of extra additional component would require, you know, some form of means testing. So how can we make that as a kind of as a generous and empathetic process as possible? So there's some really interesting work going on around that. But yeah, vital that we constantly insist that, you know, make sure we're putting out that message that at UBI we want the most vulnerable people would be better off.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sam. We've got a question from Martin Fodor, who's a Green councillor for the Redland ward in Bristol. And Martin says, I'm a councillor for the Redland ward. I've tabled a motion to the full council meeting tomorrow, which is exciting. What more can we do to get the council to seek a trial? I wonder actually if Cleo, you might be best placed to help with this one.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, Martin's putting it out there, but obviously he knows the answers to this. We have the petition already that you've set up, so we need to encourage people to sign that petition. Of course, when it gets to a certain amount of signatures, it will be debated at full council. And like many full councils, you know, it's not always the right forum for everyone. But, you know, particularly us Greens, we're really passionate about trying to encourage as many people as possible to engage with the process. It isn't the most accessible. It's quite off-putting now as well that it's moved on to Zoom. But people being able to get a statement in, a question, it all really does contribute, because it you know, it will make all the councillors aware that this is a hot issue that people care about and that it needs to be debated and we need to keep the pressure on. So those are some of the quite basic things that we can do. So it's encouraging people to engage where they can with the political process that we have that isn't perfect, but it's what we have for now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Anyone else like to suggest what we might be able to do to encourage the council to take this seriously?
Yeah, I can. Based on our kind of previous experience of getting these motions passed, it will require working with the Labour Party locally and building the case with them. And all of the most successful motions we've got passed are where progressive parties on different councils have worked together. And that often depends on the existing relationship. I don't know what it's like in Bristol. In Sheffield, the Greens and Labour do not see eye to eye. So basically, the Greens put forward a motion for UBI. Labour voted it down, then came back 6 months later with their own motion. So that might be the way it goes if you want to get something passed in Bristol. That's just the kind of the realpolitik of it, I guess. Yeah, you've just got to build the case within the Labour Party if they're the ruling party. And what they might want to do, something that is a tactic we've used quite a few times, is if it's being proposed by the Greens or by the Lib Dems, then go to Labour in advance and offer amendments to them, give them the opportunity to like put their own stamp on the motion, and also give them kind of an equal say in any press release you put out, so that they kind of get a bit of recognition for it as well. That's unfortunately the kind of party political games you have to play with these council motions.
Thank you, Sam. That reminds me, we actually had a question ages ago from, I think it was Councillor Joe Sargent, who asked if there were any Conservatives on the cross-party group.
Yeah, there isn't at the moment. We would absolutely love to have that is like the main thing we want, even as a kind of critical voice. Obviously, we don't want someone in there just wrecking it, but someone who's kind of skeptical about UBI, that would be fine to have them in the CPPLG, and then we can call it an APPLG. Of the 520 councillors who signed it, you know, there were Green, Independent, Lib Dem, Labour, SNP, all the Northern Ireland parties, and we didn't get any not a single Conservative councillor, because the discipline in that party is so strict. You know, they have, unlike the Labour Party, they have to stay on message the whole time. Even councillors on Conservative councillors on parish councils can't like step out of line with the kind of the UBI is bad line that's come from CCHQ. So it's an absolute struggle at the moment. We know that there are Conservatives in Parliament who are secretly interested and supportive of UBI, because other members of the CPPLG have said that they've had private conversations with Conservative MPs who've told them that they're really interested in the idea and they think it could, you know, kind of bring the country together in a one nation Conservative way, but they just can't back it publicly. So that's something we're really working on at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just aware of the time because it's 2 minutes to 9, so we're sort of running out of time. So we've got some really good questions though that it's such a shame that we can't get around to. Somebody's asked, like, should UBI go to children? If not, why not? I think that's an amazing question. I'd really love to talk about that. That's a particular interest of mine, but I think we are going to have to, and we could maybe stretch it a little bit. Could we maybe ask that question? Just go over that one. Yeah, let's do it. We started a little bit late anyway, so yeah, let's go for it. So yeah, should UBI go to children? And if not, why not?
I know that it's something that you know, is in discussion, as it could be something that, you know, goes to the parents but is for the children. So it's another way round, making sure that families have the right amount of income. I think that is just another concept really that probably a lot of people wouldn't be ready for, is the idea of children actually having an income. So I think with a lot of these things, it is about the ideology of it all and being able to think outside of the box that so many of us have been in for generations. So I think that would be the challenge. Hopefully someone else can input into that question as well.
Yeah, thank you, Cleo. It's a particular interest of mine as a children's rights advocate, because I think we really don't acknowledge that children are an oppressed group in our society, and that I think that's where I actually believe that that's the root of most systems of oppression, is it's where we learn the language of oppression is as children. So I think that we really do have to change our ideas about how we think about childhood and children in order to make any real significant change. Kerry-Anne, you wanted to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think I'd sort of, two thoughts came to mind. One was, you know, Cleo's point about, you know, the idea that, I mean, almost being a family, having children would be another cost of living that we'd have to take into account, like most other things. So I do think there should be something there. But also imagine if, you know, each year of your life up to the age of 16, you got UBI and it was put in a trust. And when you hit your 16th birthday, you got access to your UBI. I certainly think UBI should start, in terms of your access to it, below 18, like for sure, like at least to match up with leaving school. Because, you know, that, you know, waiting 2 years between, you know, leaving school with you know, imagine you leave school with no GCSEs and then you've got to wait 2 years. What are you going to do in that 2-year gap before your 18th birthday when you get the UBI? So I think ultimately UBI will have to go to children technically, because it will have to go to people that are under the age of 18. But I do think there is some more thinking to do on that, which I would like to do personally, because there is an issue here of agency, an increased agency that could be created for children if they were able to access an income and learn to manage that budget and all of those sorts of things. It's almost like all of the reasons you wouldn't want to do it are actually all of the reasons you should, actually, with giving it to kids, because it does then enable those children to have a certain level of autonomy, to learn how to manage money and finances, and to build those skills themselves, to be able to protect themselves from abusive scenarios by having a means of, you know, escape, and to, you know, to set up elsewhere and those sorts of things. So yeah, I think that's a really big conversation. And I think in many ways, I almost don't think sideline it. I think it's actually important that we keep that child question in, because for me, what universal basic income is about is not about just stemming some problems with the existing economy we've got. It is actually a means of transforming our economy from this sort of weird GDP idea that some rich people made up to a wellness-based and agency-based and rights-based and cooperation-based economy. So I would be absolutely pro UBI for children, and I think that was a brilliant question, and I think we need to actually have that front and centre in future debates.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to let you know, because I was surprised to learn this quite recently too, but compulsory school age is now until 18.
What?
It is, yeah. It has been for a little while now, and I was really surprised. It sort of happened under everyone's radar. But yeah.
So what is everyone? So mandatory A levels now?
And it doesn't have to be A levels, but it has to be some form of education or training until you're 18.
How do we not know this?
I know it really didn't make it big in the news, which is shocking because I think it's massive. Yeah,
it's enormous. Oh wow, okay, sorry, that's a separate conversation, but thanks for telling me. I had no idea.
I know, exactly. Yeah, we've got Councillor Joe Sargent has you have your hand up. Would you like to ask something on camera?
Yeah. So the only reason I thought I ought to pipe up is that I am actually a Labour councillor. First of all, I didn't want you to think I was a Tory, and I was just asking if I could join your club. And also, obviously, there's been quite a lot of discussion about the Labour Party, both in Bristol and nationally. And I suppose I ought to, well, I'm not going to try and defend anything that they do, to be honest. But I just wanted to ask a question, really, about the practicalities of what it means to adopt this position on UBI, because you know, you talk about how to persuade the Bristol Labour group to support a motion. Well, the Greens and Labour, yeah, we do have our sort of disagreements at times, and I'm sure there's politicking on both sides. It seems to be the way it has to be, unfortunately, but we do actually work together quite a bit, and we cooperate in lots of different ways, and we have seconded each other's motions before. I think that Labour would be morally, you know, obliged to support a motion on UBI, but we just need to understand what it means that if you're a Labour council, a city council who is taking this up, what does it actually mean? And certainly about a pilot, how would that be funded? How would it be done? So I just think it would be useful if we can talk about the practicalities, and we would know what it is we're saying yes to.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And I think it's worth pointing out that what we're talking about here is testing it out, is trialing it. So we're not saying let's just roll it out across the country. I mean, I'm personally in favour of it, but we need to see how it would actually work, and that's what we're talking about here, is a trial. Would anyone like to respond to Joe's questions?
Yeah, I could say something to that. I think these motions, they're just kind of lodging support for the idea of a pilot being in Bristol. So none of these motions commit the local authorities to any money. They're merely saying kind of if the national government launch a pilot at some point in the future, Bristol is saying we would like to put ourselves forward for it to be here. So last year, before the election last year, when it was just Liverpool and Sheffield that passed these motions, that actually got into the Labour Manifesto in December. John McDonnell said that he'd like to pilot UBI in 3 places, Liverpool, Sheffield, and somewhere in the West Midlands. So yeah, I think of the 11 councils that have passed these motions, I think the majority of them are Labour controlled, where Labour have either put the motion forwards or have supported it cross-party. And we hope that kind of creates the political ground for the Labour Party nationally to walk on. But yeah, it doesn't commit the council to any money. We're really interested to see if some of the really big cities, like could Andy Burnham's office or could Dan Jarvis's office or Marvin Rees's office, put forward the money to do some sort of micro pilot. That's a possibility, but we really, these motions definitely aren't saying that Bristol City Council has the money to run a pilot themselves. It's more about the media coverage, the creating the legitimacy, and just saying, if it is going to be somewhere, it shouldn't be in Sheffield or Leeds, it should be in Bristol. So yeah, that should appeal to councillors across the spectrum, hopefully.
Thanks, Sam. Does that answer your question, Joe?
Yes, it does. I felt a bit stupid asking it because I wasn't entirely sure, because I'm not really very familiar with the project. I mean, I know about, you know, I'm aware sort of about UBI, and if I'm honest with you, I had some reservations about it, not because I don't believe that people should have a basic income, but because I felt that there were other issues that might sort of not make it as effective. And I put it in the chat about the sheer horrendous cost of renting and Bristol is an example of that. Even the sort of low, you know, sort of areas with the most deprivation have still got really high rents. And I think that that might be the sort of thing that people might say, oh well, what's the point? Because unless we can do anything about the rents, it won't, you know, it won't make any difference. And so I think that, but I just wanted to make a little comment, if you don't mind, if you wouldn't mind indulging me. I was on a call with some Americans prior to the election when Bernie was still sort of we're just reeling from Bernie dropping out. And he said, they were talking about the healthcare, the universal healthcare that the Americans don't have. And they actually did say, they said one of the things about lobbying for one thing was it gave people the energy to actually fight for everything else. So if you actually had the money, which meant that you weren't going to get evicted or you weren't going to, you know, have to worry about paying your bills, that then you might actually have the energy to actually say, I don't like this and I don't like that. The only problem with that, of course, is that's probably the Tories know that. So that's probably the number one reason why they're going to be so resistant.
Yeah, really, yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. Like, how can you expect people to be politically active if they are just constantly in a rat race where they're just trying to meet their very basic needs and not even able to do that most of the time? If we want a really engaged civil society, we need to be meeting people's basic needs, for sure. I think that is all the time we've got, and I know, Cleo, you need to go off for something else. So I just want to thank everyone so much for coming, especially our panelists. I think there's a real transformative potential for basic income to truly become our generation's NHS. So I'd really like to ask everyone to sign our petition if you can. Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing your time and your expertise with us, and thanks to everyone else for coming along and joining the discussion and all your brilliant questions.
Well hosted, Artemis.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, brilliant job. Well done.
Fantastic work.
That was fab.